The league is doing everything they can to hide this. They want it completely wiped from the internet. But it's too late. Jeff Teague just made a massive mistake. He went after Victor Wembanyama, and it might have just ruined his entire career.
I'ma keep it real, man. We love Wemby because we ain't never seen nothing like it, bro.
He is not messing with KD, bro. The internet is tearing him apart right now. But trust me, it gets way worse. Just when Teague thought the worst was over, Wemby fired back. And his response? It was so brutal, it might actually end Teague's career. If you think this is just normal NBA drama, you are dead wrong. This is pure madness. Jeff Teague has officially lost his mind. And honestly, I am tired of people giving him a pass. We are watching a grown man trap himself in his own argument, right on his own podcast. He just can't accept what is right in front of his face. Listen to this. The Club 520 crew was arguing hard. They were debating if Wemby is on track to pass Kevin Durant. Teague leans into the mic, totally ignores reality, and says, "I'm gonna keep it real. I love Wemby. We ain't never seen anything like him. But he's not KD. It's not even possible." Think about that for a second. That is not even a real basketball take. It is two different thoughts fighting each other at the exact same time. You are telling the world this player is historic. You admit we have never seen anything like him. But then, in the very same breath, you take shots at him? That isn't analysis. That is just a guy panicking. He is trying to find any excuse to drag down the most dominant young player we have seen in decades. The hate is just way too obvious. And the numbers? They completely destroy his argument. Let's look at the facts. Wemby dropped 25 points, grabbed 11.5 rebounds, and led the league with 3.1 blocks per game, all while shooting over 51%. Oh, and he carried the Spurs to 59 wins and the number 2 seed in the brutal West. He finished third for MVP at just 22 years old. Plus, he became the youngest and first ever unanimous Defensive Player of the Year. He had 44 more blocks than the guy in second place. Look, nobody is denying KD's greatness. In his third year, KD was an absolute beast on offense. He led the league with 30 points a game. He's a monster. But here is my problem. Teague only looked at scoring. He picked the one area where Wemby is slightly behind and just ignored defense completely. He acted like half of the game doesn't even exist. It got so bad that even Draymond Green had to step in and say something.
You are talking about a list that is literally side of the court, does not exist. He sweeps an entire dimension of the game under the rug. Because once you hear what we found about
in his third year, KD was an incredible scoring machine. But he wasn't doing what Wemby is doing on both ends of the floor at the same time. And Teague knows it. He just chose to hate. Don't worry, we are going to completely destroy that comparison in a second. But here is where it gets really embarrassing for Teague. Kevin Durant himself, the actual legend Teague is using to drag Wemby down, was asked what he thought. He went on the record and said this about Wemby: "He's his own player, his own person."
He's going to create his own lane. He's much different than anybody who's ever played.
Think about that. When KD himself completely disagrees with you, you didn't just lose the argument. You lost it right in front of the main guy. But hold on. Before we go any deeper, you need to see the bigger picture. What I'm about to show you changes the whole game. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This comment from Teague is just the latest piece of a much bigger pattern. He has been doing this for a long time. And that is exactly how the trap completely snaps shut on him. If you think that crazy Kevin Durant comment was just a random hot take, you are dead wrong.
You won't even believe how far back this trend actually stretches. We have to go all the way back to July 2025. Right when Paolo Banchero signed that massive $239 million rookie extension with the Orlando Magic. The guys on the podcast were debating who they would rather build a franchise around, and Teague completely disregarded everything we saw during Wemby's rookie campaign, openly stating that he would take Paolo over Victor because Wemby has not really done anything yet. And to quote his exact words, "We only like him because he is a freak of nature." You can see it in his words that he is not even entirely sure of his his own logic.
He
is trapped in this bizarre loop where he tries to praise the kid, but then immediately walks it backward to devalue his actual impact on the basketball court. Oh, and it gets so much worse than that. Later on, when the entire basketball media space was losing its mind over the rumor of Kevin Durant potentially joining forces with Wembanyama in San Antonio, Teague completely shut down the entire conversation. He explicitly told his co-hosts that he did not even want to watch the Spurs play, and said that Wemby was going to lose it, and casually dismissed one of the most historic franchises in modern sports history like they were a lottery team. But the absolute peak of this entire agenda boiled over just a few weeks ago in May. During the same week, he dropped that infamous KD comparison. The Spurs were locked in an absolute dogfight in the second round of the playoffs against the Minnesota Timberwolves, a series where the Wolves were openly using an aggressive, highly physical strategy that Wembanyama himself described as a deliberate, systematic plan to rage bait him.
I feel like the rage baiting would have been maybe one of the strategies.
The consequences are real, though, because we're letting retired in Game 4, after getting hit and targeted for 3 straight quarters, Wemby finally caught a highly controversial flagrant penalty too and got ejected from the game. But while the entire internet, multiple former players, and half of the analytical community were screaming about the double standard, Teague scrambled right back to his microphone and dedicated a massive chunk of his podcast to explaining exactly why the ejection was totally warranted, practically cheering for the refs tossing Wemby out of a pivotal playoff game. So you have to ask yourself at this point, because I know you are already thinking it, whether any of this is actually rooted in basketball analysis. Because there is a name for what you call it when someone consistently, across multiple seasons and multiple contexts, finds every possible angle to dismiss the same player. Now here is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Because once you hear what we found about Teague's actual history with the San Antonio Spurs franchise, everything you just heard is going to hit completely differently. But before we even get to that, we need to talk about who Jeff Teague actually is as a basketball player, because the absolute audacity you need to stand in a studio and project a career limit onto a player as elite as Wemby is genuinely off the charts. If you listen to him talk on his podcast, you would think we are listening to a multi-time champion or a guy who has multiple gold medals sitting in a trophy case at home. But the actual reality of his 12-year NBA career tells a completely different story. Teague played 826 regular season games across 5 different teams, mostly making a living as a solid, dependable starting guard, who ended his career with very respectable but incredibly average numbers of 12 points and 5 assists a game. He managed to secure exactly one single All-Star appearance back in 2015, when the entire Atlanta Hawks starting 5 basically got voted in together because they were running a beautifully selfless system under Mike Budenholzer. And here is the most hilarious part, because Teague himself literally came out on his own show and gave us the most damning piece of evidence regarding his entire basketball mentality. He openly admitted to his co-hosts and millions of listeners that making that one solitary All-Star team completely killed his entire hunger for the game.
I was so hyped to make that team, but I wish I didn't make it. I'm saying that because I got comfortable.
He basically said that once he checked that box, he felt like he had completely made it, and his competitive drive just evaporated into thin air. The man literally admitted that a single accolade in a 12-year career satisfied his entire appetite. And now he is sitting comfortably behind a microphone trying to evaluate the drive, the hunger, and the ultimate competitive peak of Victor Wembanyama.
The best part? Wemby didn't even let him get away with it. He dropped a response that completely destroyed Teague, and he didn't even sweat. Reporters asked Wemby about all the noise coming from Teague's podcast. According to team insiders, Wemby simply said, if he was a better player, he wouldn't need to sit on a podcast and say crazy things just to make money. But honestly, this shows how messed up our sports culture has become. The players we grew up watching would never do this. Did Magic Johnson start a podcast just to hate on a 22-year-old Shaq? Did Isaiah Thomas go on a media tour to attack Kevin Garnett? Those guys competed. They let their game do the talking. When the next generation came up, they either helped them or got out of the way. That era is totally gone. A retired point guard who averaged 12 points a game gets the exact same spotlight as an all-time great. All he has to do is say something crazy enough to get clicks. And that brings us to the part of the story that the mainstream media is too scared to touch. There is a very specific reason Jeff Teague keeps targeting Wemby. It goes back to a team that spent over 10 years making his own career look tiny. This is where everything finally makes sense. No one is asking the real question here. Why does Jeff Teague have such a massive, unprovoked problem with a 22-year-old French kid who did absolutely nothing to him? This is way deeper than just a bad take or chasing views. Look at Teague's actual career. During his best years in the NBA, he got completely destroyed by the San Antonio Spurs. For years, he ran straight into a brick wall. It happened when he was with the Hawks, the Pacers, and the Timberwolves. Every single time Teague had a good team ready to win, Greg Popovich, Tim Duncan, and Kawhi Leonard were right there to ruin his dreams. They sent him packing every single time. Teague thought he was finally safe. Tim Duncan retired. Manu Ginobili stepped away. The Spurs stopped winning for a few seasons. But suddenly, the monster is right back at his front door. Only this time, it's not Tim Duncan. It's a 7'4" French alien. A kid who literally trained with Shaolin monks just to work on his balance. A kid who meets up with Hakeem Olajuwon to learn post moves and copies Kevin Garnett's defense. Wemby is casually breaking records that haven't been touched since Wilt Chamberlain. Every single time Teague opens social media and sees these highlights trending, something in his brain just snaps. He is watching the same team that ruined his career rise back from the dead. And they are doing it with a guy who breaks records every single week. He just can't handle it. Want the ultimate proof? Look at what Teague accidentally said on his podcast recently. The crew was talking about the upcoming playoffs. Teague looked right at his co-hosts and told them straight up, if anyone plays the Spurs, it's completely over, because nobody can stop Wemby. Think about how crazy that is. This is the same guy who just tried to tell us Wemby hasn't really done anything. But the second his take started looking bad, he slipped up. He admitted Wemby is unstoppable. Watching him melt down on camera is wild. But the actual numbers make this whole thing 10 times worse. Once you ignore Teague's hurt feelings and look at the real stats, it gets embarrassing. The numbers completely expose these podcast guys and their clickbait drama.
Everyone wants to focus on Kevin Durant being one of the top 5 purest scorers, and honestly, nobody is denying that. The whole point of this conversation is not to pretend Kevin Durant is not one of the greatest scorers who has ever touched a basketball, because he absolutely is, and anybody who tells you differently is trolling. KD was an absolute cheat code in his third year, averaging 30.1 points per game. By the time he turned 25, he already had 4 of those scoring titles sitting on his mantle, completely cementing himself as a legendary player. But this is exactly where Jeff Teague's whole argument falls off a cliff, because he expects you to look at KD's historic scoring numbers and completely ignore what is happening on the other side of the ball. Wemby is out here casually rewriting the entire blueprint of what someone can even do in their third year in the league. Like, we are talking about a 22-year-old kid dropping those kinds of numbers while dragging San Antonio to a ridiculous 59-19 record, which is literally the second best record in the entire NBA. Back when KD was in his year 3, yeah, he was a walking bucket, but he wasn't dominating the court on both ends like this. KD wasn't anchoring a top 3 defense. He wasn't out here averaging over 3 blocks a night. And he definitely wasn't taking home a unanimous Defensive Player of the Year award. Honestly, if you want to talk about entering uncharted territory, what Wemby just pulled off in his very first conference finals game should be straight up illegal for someone his age. And if you really want to know how insane this is, in the entire history of the league, out of every single conference finals game ever played, only 6 players have ever dropped a 40-point, 20-rebound masterpiece. Like, you are talking about a list that is literally just Wilt Chamberlain, Elgin Baylor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Charles Barkley, Moses Malone, and now Victor Wembanyama. But it gets even crazier than that, because out of all those legendary Hall of Famers, only 2 of them actually pulled it off in their very first conference finals debut. Just Wilt Chamberlain and Victor Wembanyama. That is the kind of insane company this kid is keeping, while Jeff Teague is sitting on a chair in a cozy studio trying to downplay his impact. Wemby isn't even trying to be the next Kevin Durant. He is out here busy inventing a completely new category of basketball player, which is exactly why why KD himself told the media to stop making those comparisons. And that brings us to the real comparison that nobody in the mainstream media actually has the guts to make right now. Defensively, Wemby is already operating at a level that Kevin Durant didn't even come close to touching until his late 20s, if he ever even got there at all. Sure, KD obviously has the upper hand when it comes to just scoring, but you have to remember that Victor is literally 22 years old and openly telling reporters that he's only at like 15% of his actual potential. He is out here dropping literal Wilt Chamberlain numbers in the deepest rounds of the postseason while he's still figuring out how to process the NBA game. And that thought should honestly terrify every single team in the league. But this whole situation just exposes a much bigger, much funnier problem with how these retired players handle the internet nowadays. Guys like Jeff Teague figured out a long time ago that in the modern clickbait era, throwing absolute filth and hate at a superstar pays way better than just telling the truth. If Teague sits in front of his microphone and gives a smart, measured take about how Victor is clearly on track to be an all-time great, the clip probably gets, 10,000 views, and everyone just moves on with their day. But if he says that Wemby isn't messing with KD and hasn't really done anything in San Antonio, the algorithm absolutely eats it up. The video gets 10 million impressions, and the podcast checks just keep clearing. It is hate for profit, pure and simple, and Teague is totally down to sacrifice his own basketball credibility just to keep his name trending on your timeline. But you honestly have to laugh at this point, because the moment you think Teague might actually just be having a bad day, you realize he is completely stuck inside a contradiction wall. Let's look at the actual timeline of his takes over the last few months, because it's
in December. Right?
He was on his podcast saying it's safe to say Jokic, Wemby, and Anthony Edwards are taking over the entire league. Safe take, totally normal. But flash forward to right now during the playoffs, and suddenly he's saying that Wemby isn't messing with KD. He literally went from, this kid is overtaking the league, to he's overrated to, if anyone plays the Spurs, it's over, they have nothing for him. Pick a lane, bro. The funniest part is when he tries to claim Wemby hasn't really done anything yet. Like what? At 21, Victor already led the NBA in blocks, won Rookie of the Year unanimously, made all-defensive first team, became an all-star, and literally survived a massive blood clot scare that could have ended his whole career before it started. To look at that resume and say he hasn't done anything is pure brain rot. But what Teague doesn't know is that the real basketball fans see right through all of this noise because of who Victor actually is. Last December, right before the NBA Cup Finals, he found out his grandmother, who was one of the closest people on earth to him, had just passed away in France.
The
Club 520 crew were most guys would have sat that game out, but Wemby laced up, went out there, and dropped 18 and 6 through pure grief. That's the kind of discipline and respect for the game you can't fake for a camera.
But the media still tries to call this guy soft. Right after the Spurs won their first playoff series, he was caught crying on the court. And immediately, the internet tried to clown him for it.
He just told reporters he refuses to carry the burden of hiding his emotions. Think about the mental toughness it takes to say that after getting physically targeted every night, surviving a medical scare, losing your grandmother, and dragging your squad straight to the Western Conference Finals. There's a reason the writers gave him the Magic Johnson Award for combining on-court dominance with absolute grace off it. Popovich even said he's exactly like Tim Duncan and David Robinson because he actually cares about the process, not just the fame. Jeff Teague is just the result of a broken media ecosystem that rewards pure outrage over basketball accuracy. We live in a world where the loudest, most controversial take gets fed to the algorithm, while the truth gets buried. The consequences are real, though, because we're letting retired 12-point-a-game players sit behind microphones spewing absolute dirt on generational superstars who have already completely passed them by. Do you actually trust podcasters chasing a quick check? Or the legends and historic numbers showing we're watching the rise of one of the most dangerous players to ever touch a basketball?